Hello and welcome back to Formula One for Fummies. I'm very excited to be back for the second episode of this limited series. But firstly, ladies and gentlemen, I have a very important matter to discuss and to clear up. I've had some very concerning questions about the origin and makeup of the word Fummy. Let me just be very clear. The F in Fummy stands for Formula One. Not any other colorful words that might start with an F. However, I guess if you do identify as one of those Fummies, my sincere condolences and good luck with all your future endeavors. So, this past weekend was the Monaco Grand Prix. If you are interested, my other show, the TF1 show, released a recap earlier this week. So if you missed the race, go and have a listen for a quick fill-in and just, to get up to date with the latest happenings in the Formula One world. I think firstly I want to thank all of you for the very, very nice feedback that I got for my first episode for F1 for Fummies now. Today we will be discussing the drivers of Formula One. So who are they, where do they come from, and what you need to look out for when watching all of them drive around a track on a Sunday race. In terms of the structure of the episode, I will be discussing each driver in varying degrees of detail, so depending on how interesting or relevant I feel they are this year. And then I will, at the end of the episode, discuss some famous and legendary drivers that have since retired. So let's get cracking, folks. Firstly, I think it's probably most appropriate to talk about the current championship leader, Mr. Lewis Hamilton. So, Lewis Hamilton is from England originally, but now he lives in Monaco. He drives for the Mercedes Formula One team. So, obviously, the Mercedes Formula One team is the sort of leading team, but I'll obviously discuss this a bit more in the episode that'll deal with the teams in Formula One specifically. Lewis Hamilton is a 5-time Drivers' World Champion. He's won 4 out of the last 5 World Championships, and then he won his first championship in 2008 with McLaren Mercedes. So Lewis Hamilton was a bit of a child prodigy, and he was one of the youngest sort of ever race winners, people to finish on a podium. He had an incredible first season in Formula One in 2007, where he basically competed with then defending world champion Fernando Alonso up until the last race and basically tied him for second in the championship. And since then, Hamilton has gone from strength to strength. He has the all-time record for number of pole positions. So pole position being on the Saturday qualifying, the driver with the fastest lap would then start the race from the first position slot on the grid. So Lewis Hamilton is an extremely, extremely fast driver. He's probably the most well-known driver in Formula One at the moment. And so I'd say in terms of his capabilities, he is definitely one of the fastest drivers over one lap. He's extremely talented. He's a very good wheel-to-wheel racer. So he's very good with, overtaking and defending against drivers. And he's just probably at the moment the all-round best driver on the grid, as I mentioned in the TF1 show about my current top 10 drivers in Formula One. Now, his teammate is called Valtteri Bottas. So Valtteri Bottas is from Finland, obviously also drives for Mercedes. This is his third year for driving for the team. So Valtteri Bottas replaced Nico Rosberg after Rosberg retired from Mercedes. Then Bottas joined Hamilton and Mercedes from Williams, where Bottas was previously a driver. So Valtteri is, this year competing quite closely for the championship. I think he's just behind Lewis in terms of the overall points after the Monaco Grand Prix. He's also he's a very consistent driver. He doesn't make many mistakes, and he's also quite quick over one lap. Maybe not as, devastatingly quick as Hamilton so I'd say in terms of overall capabilities, probably not as highly rated as Lewis Hamilton, but a very, very capable teammate and someone that very rarely makes mistakes and is keeping Hamilton honest this year. So I think if you are a new watcher of Formula One, I think for this year especially, please watch out for the sort of inter-team battle between Lewis and Valtteri Bottas and sort of see how they race against each other during every weekend and how they stack up even in practice and in qualifying. And I think they're going to cut each other really close, although I do think Hamilton will still have the upper hand at the end. Now, the third driver that I want to speak about is also probably a very well-known driver. His name is Sebastian Vettel. Now, most of you will maybe know Sebastian Vettel from his Red Bull days. So he's a 4-time world champion, where he won the Drivers' World Championship in 2010, 11, 12, and 13 with Red Bull Racing. So after that amazing 4-year streak that he had, he stayed with Red Bull Racing for one more year where they were less successful. And then at the end of 2014, Sebastian Vettel moved to Ferrari, and he stayed there ever since. So Sebastian is from Germany, but I think he stays in Switzerland. He's quite a secretive driver in terms of his private life. We don't know a lot about him. We understand that he's married and then he has 2 daughters, but you will never ever see them at a Formula One race, and he almost never ever speaks about them. He doesn't have social media accounts, so yeah, he's quite a secretive driver, and you don't really know what goes on with Sebastian Vettel when he's not, at a race or doing some press for Formula One specifically. Now, since Vettel has been with Ferrari, he's had moderate success. I think in 2017 and 2018, he was the main challenger to Lewis Hamilton and Mercedes in terms of, giving them a bit of competition for the World Championship. But alas, it didn't work out for them, in any of the years, especially last year where Ferrari probably had the faster car over the main part of the season. But Sebastian Vettel did make some mistakes. As a driver, like he spun out a few times, and things just didn't go well for him. So Vettel is still obviously in the hunt this year, but although he is quite a bit behind the Mercedes drivers. But he is a 4-time world champion and obviously very highly regarded amongst the other drivers. So have a look out for him and see how well he stacks up against his very young new teammate that we'll speak about just now. So the 4th driver I want to speak about is Max Verstappen, and that might also be a name that is quite well known, even for people that aren't that interested in Formula One up to now. So Max Verstappen made a lot of headlines a few years back because he started in Formula One as a 17-year-old with the Toro Rosso team, where, when Lewis Hamilton started back in 2007, I think he was 22 years old, and people were freaking out about how young he was. He was the youngest. He was breaking all sorts of records for the youngest, podium sitter, the youngest person to win a race. And he was 22 years old. And then, Max Verstappen came onto the scene in 2015 and was 17 years old in Formula One. And people at the beginning thought that there's no way this guy is going to be able to, handle, firstly just driving the car, and then all of the pressure that goes along with it, and, the media scrutiny and everything. But he's proven all of us wrong. He was basically at Toro Rosso for 1 year. And then in the middle of 2016, very controversially, Max Verstappen was swapped with Daniel Kvyat, who we'll talk about a bit later, by Red Bull. So Daniel Kvyat lost his seat at Red Bull, one of the fastest teams, and was relegated back to Toro Rosso, while Max Verstappen was moved up into the Red Bull team to partner Daniel Ricciardo at the time. And then even more impressively, the first race after that switch happened, Max Verstappen actually won the race in Spain, to become the youngest ever winner of a Grand Prix. And since then he's won a few more additional races, and he's really well known for, he is extremely fast. He's a very, very good wheel-to-wheel racer, similar to Lewis Hamilton, where he can get an overtake done where a lot of people wouldn't have, and he's also very, very robust with his defense against people trying to overtake him, sometimes a bit too robust. So he has gotten in a bit of trouble in the past around the type of maneuvers he does with his car when he doesn't want someone to overtake him necessarily, that might border on being potentially illegal. But I think, in terms of the future prospect, Max Verstappen is probably the brightest star. He's driving absolutely brilliantly this year, and someone to really look forward to. He's probably, him and Charles Leclerc, that I'm going to talk about next, are probably going to become the two big rivals to each other over the coming few years, as soon as Hamilton and Vettel, get to the end of their careers. So then I guess I can speak about, the man of the moment. He's probably the darling of everyone in Formula One, me included. I absolutely love him, and I love the way that he drives and just the way that he goes about things. Charles Leclerc, the new Monegasque driver that drives for Ferrari, Sebastian Vettel's teammate. He was a bit of a sensation, a bit like, you know, Verstappen and Lewis Hamilton was, where, you know, they were incredibly fast and successful in sort of the lower down formulae, you know, in Formula 3 and Formula 2. And in Leclerc's first season in Formula 1 last year, where he was a driver for the Sauber team, he really, really outperformed the capability of what the car had. And he was just extremely impressive as a, you know, a first-year rookie driver, which obviously led to Ferrari noticing him and now, you know, moving up into the big Ferrari team, where he's now partnering Sebastian Vettel and really giving him I'd say a run for his money. He's been a bit unfortunate over the past 2 or 3 races with, you know, strategy calls by the team, and, you know, just, yeah, the Ferrari has let him down slightly in terms of, you know, his overall results as a driver. But I just think in terms of potential and in terms of all-around likability, you can't go wrong with Charles Leclerc. And, you know, as I mentioned, look out for him and Verstappen to battle well into the future. Then next, I'm going to talk about Pierre Gasly, the second Red Bull driver. So Pierre Gasly is the replacement this year for Daniel Ricciardo, after Daniel Ricciardo controversially announced last year that he was going to leave the fast Red Bull team and go to a slower team in Renault, because, you know, he was no longer happy with what was going on at Red Bull, but I'll get into that a bit later. So Red Bull then had to pull up one of their Red Bull juniors. So Red Bull has like a junior program where they basically groom, you know, young drivers into, you know, finally becoming, with the idea of them then finally driving for, you know, the Red Bull racing team at the end, which is then obviously the case for Pierre Gasly, where he was, you know, previously he is still in the Red Bull Drivers Academy, where he won the Formula 2 championship with them initially, I think 3 years ago, was then moved up into the Toro Rosso team, which is the junior Formula 1 team for Red Bull. And then, you know, this year after Ricciardo left, Gasly was moved up into the main Red Bull team to partner Max Verstappen. Now, it hasn't been the easiest of rides for poor Pierre Gasly over the first few months. Verstappen is incredibly fast, and, you know, it's been a bit of a steep learning curve for Gasly to get used to, you know, the new team and the new environment. So he's been a bit slower than his teammate in the same car, which is problematic for him. But, you know, I do hope that he improves over the year and can prove that, you know, he does belong in a top team like Red Bull, and that he can compete with Verstappen at the highest level. All right, the next driver I want to speak about is Carlos Sainz Jr. Now, the most interesting thing about him, you know, Carlos Sainz was also part of the Red Bull Junior Drivers Academy with Pierre Gasly and Max Verstappen, but he was never promoted up into the big Red Bull team. So he's now driving for McLaren after having driven for Renault the year before. I personally feel he's an extremely talented driver, and it's probably the most underrated driver on the grid. And the most interesting thing about him is, you know, obviously he's from Spain, and that the fact that he is the son of a very famous rally champion, Carlos Sainz Sr., who was, I think, a 2-time rally world champion as well. So some real racing pedigree there. The next driver I want to speak about is Kevin Magnussen. So Kevin Magnussen is from Denmark. His dad also drove in Formula 1, so he is, you know, definitely part of sort of that Formula 1 lineage. He drives for the Haas Formula 1 team, and I'm not going to say too much about him, but he's quite an aggressive driver, and he's known for being very, very difficult to overtake and, you know, making it almost impossible for drivers to pass him, whether it's legal or illegal. He refuses to let anybody past. Next is Sergio Pérez from Mexico. So Sergio Pérez drives for the Racing Point team, which was previously called the Force India team, but I'll talk about that a bit more in the episode about, you know, the Formula 1 teams. Sergio Pérez is one of those incredibly consistent and reliable drivers that will deliver good results whenever he has to, whenever he has the ability. He's always there to take an opportunity. You know, obviously he doesn't have the fastest car on the grid, but he's one that will really exploit any opportunity that he might have to get a good result. So yeah, he's very, very highly regarded as a driver amongst, you know, his peers, and is always someone that can provide a good race and, you know, just be a very, very good and solid driver. Then poor old Kimi Räikkönen, who's the next driver. So Kimi Räikkönen is from Finland, and he is a very, very fast driver, and he's also the oldest driver on the grid. Now, Kimi Räikkönen first started for Sauber, I think, in 2001 or 2002, I'm not exactly sure, and was then, after that, quickly moved up into the McLaren Mercedes team, who was at that stage, in 2004, 5, 6, up until probably 2012 or so, one of the top teams in Formula One. And he was known for just being incredibly fast and just consistent and being naturally talented. Despite not maybe being the most diligent driver, he wasn't the driver that'll, put in the laps, put in the, the effort to try and find extra speed here and there. He would just get in a car and drive and be incredibly fast. So Kimi Räikkönen won the World Championship with Ferrari in 2007. So he went from Sauber to McLaren to Ferrari in 2007, where he then won the World Championship, stayed with Ferrari a few more years. Then he quit the sport altogether, went to go rallying for a bit, and then he came back in 2012, I think, with the Renault team, or the Lotus team at that stage, and drove very well during that year in 2013, and then was promoted back into Ferrari for 2014, where he then drove up until 2018. So in other words, last year. Kimi Räikkönen's second stint at Ferrari probably wasn't his most successful. He was, first teammates to Fernando Alonso, who's probably one of the all-time great drivers, and then with Sebastian Vettel over the last few years. And, he didn't really perform that well when measured against his teammates, which is probably why it was high time for Räikkönen to maybe make room for new, young, fresh blood, which is now Charles Leclerc, partnering Sebastian Vettel. And Kimi Räikkönen now drives for the Sauber team alongside Antonio Giovinazzi, who we'll speak about a bit later. Okay, the next driver I want to speak about is Lando Norris, who is Carlos Sainz's teammate at McLaren. Lando Norris is a rookie this year, so not too much yet about him that we know. He was second last year in the Formula 2 Championship, which led him to be promoted into Formula 1 this year. After Lando, I want to speak about Daniil Kvyat. So I alluded to him a bit earlier. He was the teammate of Daniel Ricciardo at Red Bull. He was basically the guy that was swapped out in 2016 with Max Verstappen when Max was moved up into the Red Bull team, and then obviously Daniil Kvyat was moved down. Obviously big drama, during that whole thing, where obviously if you are driving for a top team like Red Bull and halfway through the season, your boss basically tells you, okay, no, you're not good enough, we're going to swap you with another driver. And Kvyat left the sport at the end of 2016. Then, surprisingly, Red Bull didn't have any other drivers for their junior team in Toro Rosso, so they called Daniel back, and he is doing better than ever, I think. I think he's matured, he's really, really driving well this year and matching up well with his very young and talented teammate Alexander Albon, who we'll speak about next. So Alexander Albon is from Thailand, and he was probably Charles Leclerc's biggest rival back when they were, a bit younger in the junior formulae. He's extremely fast, extremely consistent, and has really, really performed well this year. So good on Alexander Albon. And I think if you guys watch the races, look out for him and Kvyat, because both of them are really doing well in that Toro Rosso. The next driver is Daniel Ricciardo. So Daniel Ricciardo is from Australia. He used to drive for Red Bull Racing. He was quite famous, for his podium celebration where he drank champagne out of his shoe. Don't know why I would like to do that, but to each his own, I guess. Daniel Ricciardo made a big controversial decision mid last year where he announced that he will no longer partner Max Verstappen at Red Bull this year. He's going to move to the Renault Formula 1 team. Now, we all suspect, and I think the main reason was that, Max Verstappen at that stage last year was sort of seen as the golden child for Red Bull, the Wunderkind, the absolute, essence of what Red Bull wanted in one of their drivers. And Daniel, I think, just felt that, Max is just it's going to become more and more about Max the longer he stays there, and that he's probably not going to be prioritized. So that's why I decided to, move to Renault and help build the Renault team, who's currently not the fastest in Formula 1, help build them to, maybe one day being right in front and being a top team that will help him win a world championship potentially. Now, partnering Daniel Ricciardo is Nico Hülkenberg, probably one of the other most underrated drivers on the grid. So Nico Hülkenberg was also a bit of a sensation before he came into Formula 1, where he drove unbelievably well in Formula 2, which is sort of like the series just below Formula 1. And, ever since then, he's just been so unlucky in terms of, how his career turned out. I mean, he was always destined for a top team, and then it just never happened that way, or there was always someone else that they wanted before him. But he's still a very, very talented driver, and, Hülkenberg against Ricciardo at Renault is a very fascinating battle to watch, between the two teammates. So definitely something to look out for. Now, the last few drivers, I'm just going to skim over quickly because most of them are quite new and we don't really know that much about them. The first one is Lance Stroll. So Lance Stroll is Canadian and he is an extremely rich father. So his father has basically bought him 2 teams over the last 2 years. Last year, his father basically was the main sponsor for the Williams team, with obviously the main requirement being that Lance, his son, will drive for them. And then this year, he basically saved the Racing Point team and Sergio Pérez, the other driver, out of administration, and is now again the main sponsor there, with obviously again the main requirement being that Lance Stroll drives for the Racing Point team alongside Sergio Pérez. Now, I'm going to be frank and say that Lance has not yet really performed up to the standard that you would like him to be at. So I'm not going to talk too much about him. He basically bought his seat up until this point, and we're still really to see a very good result from him to justify him being in Formula 1 properly. The next driver is Romain Grosjean. So he's a French driver. He partners Kevin Magnussen in the Haas team. He's also quite talented, very fast, but extremely erratic, and he makes a lot of mistakes. And you'll probably see a lot more of his mistakes over the coming year. The next driver is Antonio Giovinazzi. He's a rookie. He drives for the Sauber team, and yeah, that's about it. He's from Italy. Not much more to say there. 19th is George Russell. So George Russell is a very, very big talent, along with Lando Norris and Charles Leclerc and Max Verstappen. George Russell won the Formula 2 championship last year, so he's coming in hot. He's unfortunately though driving for the Williams team, who has really struggled. So he is basically competing with his teammate, who I'll talk about now, for last place, because the Williams team has by far and away the slowest car. So, I mean, you can be the best driver in the world, but you're not going to get that Williams way up the order, unfortunately. And then lastly, Robert Kubica. Now, Robert Kubica is, I think, along with Hamilton and Kimi Räikkönen, one of the oldest drivers on the grid. Robert is from Poland, and he, when he burst onto the scene in, I think, 2007 as well, he was really a highly rated, highly regarded, one of the fastest drivers around. And he did perform extremely well initially, where I think, his team, BMW Sauber, quit the sport at that stage, and then Robert, I think, continued on for a bit, but then decided he's going to quit Formula 1 and go do something else. And then, he was in a horrific accident, a rallying accident actually, so nothing to do with Formula 1. And he was in this accident, and, it was horrible. I think he lost some of his fingers. He broke so many bones in his body. It was actually, it was a miracle that he survived. And the fact that he's back in Formula 1 this year is an absolutely incredible story. People are still trying to figure out whether, he's still as fast as he used to be, whether he's still as talented, whether he's too old, whether he's, the injuries, the lasting effect of the injuries are actually affecting his driving. I guess we'll never know. But yeah, watch out for Robert Kubica against George Russell, since they're both driving for Williams, who are a bit slower than the rest. So you're not really going to see them compete with the other drivers. But, I guess still interesting to see, youth versus experience, that whole story. Okay, so I've basically now discussed the entire grid. I then quickly would then at the end, now that we've been nearing the end of the episode, to just talk about one or two legendary drivers that, you probably would have heard about, just to provide some context about them, why they are as famous as they are. So the first one is Michael Schumacher, and he's an absolute legend of Formula 1. I think most of you guys, even if you didn't follow F1 at all, knew about, Michael Schumacher and his Ferrari in the beginning, the early 2000s, where, Michael Schumacher has the record for world championships, won He has won 7 world championships, which is an incredible number. He won 2 with his Benetton team early in his career, and then obviously the famous 5 that he won with Ferrari, in his absolute prime. Where's Michael Schumacher now? So Michael Schumacher is actually, he was in a horrible accident, skiing accident. While skiing, he hit his head and he had serious brain injuries. He obviously was hospitalized. He survived the accident, luckily. But, since then, none of us really know exactly how Michael is doing. It's a bit of a myth, actually, how he is. Can he walk? Can he talk? Nobody knows exactly how healthy Michael Schumacher is at the moment. And his family, guards him and his health, with extreme caution. And, nobody, no media, no anyone is ever allowed to actually talk about Michael and to understand, how he's doing today. So, we all hope that one day Michael Schumacher will recover fully, or recover to an extent where he might potentially see his son race in Formula 1. His son, Mick Schumacher, is now in the Formula 2 series this year and is probably going to, at some stage, make it into the Formula 1 into a Formula 1 team in the near future. Something to really look out for. Then the second driver I want to talk about, second legendary driver, is Ayrton Senna. So Ayrton Senna was a Brazilian driver that drove in the 80s and in the early 90s. He's probably regarded by many as the greatest driver of all time, definitely as the fastest driver of all time. So when I say fastest, I mean just absolutely naturally talented, where he can just do anything with a car. And, he used to be so much faster than anybody else, including his teammates, over one lap. It was amazing to see. So I think the main legend of Ayrton Senna is obviously the accident that he had. So he, in 1994 at the Imola Grand Prix, he was in a fatal accident at the one corner where Ayrton was killed. Obviously, he's such a well-known and famous driver, especially in Brazil, that the death shocked the entire world and the entire, racing world, where, still today people speak about Senna and what a legend he was and how early he was taken from the sport, and the impact that he had on, the drivers up until now. And so many of the drivers now still say that he's probably, he was their hero when they grew up watching Formula 1. So, Michael and Ayrton are probably the two most legendary drivers that have now, retired or that don't drive anymore. So, just look out for them. They're still mentioned quite frequently and are mostly used as sort of barometers to measure the current drivers against by most people in Formula 1. So that's that for today. I hope you know a bit more now about each of the drivers. So when you all watch the Montreal Grand Prix, the Canadian Grand Prix, with me in a bit less than 2 weeks from now, you know exactly what's going on with each of the drivers. As I've mentioned in the first Formula 1 for Fummies episode, please go and subscribe, rate and comment on whichever platform you listen on. If you have any specific questions or topics that you would like me to cover, please leave a comment wherever, and I can try and see where I can fit it in. We are available on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Castbox, Stitcher, and basically any podcasting service that you can think of. Please also listen and subscribe to the TF1 show, which is my main Formula 1 podcast, where I discuss the more interesting and intricate details of Formula 1. If you're interested, just to go and have a listen there. And then finally, I'm on Twitter as the @TF1 show, and on Instagram, and then my handle there is @the TF1 show. So please connect with me. I'm always keen for a chat about Formula 1. I'll see you next time for the next episode. Bye bye.